Thanks for coming out, Grandpa. Thanks for letting us come to your house to do this podcast.
You're welcome.
I appreciate it. Unfortunately, right now I goofed up and I didn't bring the splitter for the third microphone, so you and I are going to share. That's okay. All right.
Awesome.
Huh? Let's start from the beginning. What?
What do you mean start from the beginning? My birthday?
Well, not necessarily your birthday, but like let's start from the beginning. What were some of the things that were like the most prominent in the 30s and 40s that you can remember?
Well, the Depression was very, very prominent when I was very young because I know my parents did not have a lot of money. My father used to get up at, I don't know what time, but he left the house about 5 in the morning and had a job in a cleaning store way up on North Clark Street, and we lived way southwest. So he traveled by streetcar to keep the job, and he used to come home like 7, 8 o'clock at night. So didn't see much of my father when I was probably 5, 6 in that period. Um, and you want to hear sort of an anecdote?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I would guess that I know I was in school, so it had to be first or second grade. And at that time, we used to wear high top shoes, and Oxfords were coming into style. And my parents, I had to have a new pair of shoes, and my parents went out, bought me a pair of shoes, and I remember they cost $2. And when I opened the box, there were high tops, and I wanted the Oxfords. So I went down in the basement and I found I think I used a hacksaw and I cut the top off the shoe. And of course, it just about fell apart. So I ruined the shoes. And my mother was in tears because they probably, that $2 they had saved to buy me shoes for X period. Um, that's one thing remember from the Depression. Things got better. My uncle and my father started a cleaning business. In those days, cleaners picked up and delivered to homes, and the business, I would guess, thrived all the way up through World War II. At one time, they got up to 5 cleaning trucks in the neighborhood. It was called Community Cleaners, and then during the war, of course, you couldn't get gas because everything was rationed. So the business sort of dwindled a little bit. But right after the war, they sold out to a couple of GIs, vets that came back. And my father went semi-retired, retirement, and opened a small store. And he was a tailor, did a lot of tailoring. Um, Myself in school, I like school. Uh, I was a short kid and overweight.
We have that in common
Um, and in those they didn't have AP classes. They shoved you ahead, so I got shoved. And the semesters were only half years. It wasn't a full year. So I got shoved ahead 2 half years, and uh, I did all right, except for years I struggled with fractions because I'd never gone through a class with fractions. um, but school was pleasant. In fact, I was the mayor of Mark Twain High School of my last year there. I ran for mayor and won.
Nice.
Oh, that's awesome.
Um, and the only reason I did that is I got in a little bitty rubber type printing press where you put your things in and you just printed them. And I had printed a bunch of flyers up with my name on it and vote for me. And I had them all around the school. So everybody at least knew me. And I think that's the only reason I won. Um, uh, Another anecdote. You can cut some of this stuff out, right? Okay. Um, we used to get lunches, and I don't remember now if it was every day or maybe 1 or 2 days a week, served in grammar school.
That's all they would feed you once or twice a week?
I can't remember
Uh,
now. Maybe it was every day,
yeah.
but the story is this: spaghetti was one of the common things that they served, and as a kid, how do you eat spaghetti? You slurp it. So I'm slurping my spaghetti, and the principal's standing right here behind me, and she taps me on my shoulder and says, "Bobby," or Bob, I don't know what she called me at that time. "I'm going to teach you how to eat spaghetti." "Okay, Miss Flanagan," still remember her name. And she says, "You cut it up with your fork." So even to this day, I cut my spaghetti because she embarrassed the heck out of me because she made me stand up and do that. High school was uneventful. I was still rather small for the first couple of years in high school and overweight. And then between my sophomore and junior year, so I grew quite a bit. And the weight stayed the same. As a matter of fact, ridiculous thing, but insurance in those days, insurance agents came to your house and you bought a policy and you paid it every month. And I guess my mother was putting a small insurance policy on me. And the agent had always been the agent looked at me and says, "Has he been sick?" And my mother said, "No." "Well, he weighs the same as he did last year. And look at how much taller he is." Well, I just shot up
Yeah.
and kept the weight the same.
Right.
I, um, Freshman and sophomore year, I did not do much at school. Played some football the uh, junior and senior year because I was big enough then. Um, and so played for Kelly High School, and I think we won one game every year I played with them. But we played some of the technical schools like Tilden, which was a all boys school, and they really had uh, array of talent, so to speak. We didn't. Um, I worked in what we had at that time. I don't believe we had a library in the school. This was Kelly High School in the Southside area of Brighton Park. Uh, that's where the school is located. Um, I used to ride a bus from our house uh, to Central and Archer, and then get on a streetcar at Central and Archer to take me to 42nd in California. That's where the school was. I lived at 52nd in Massasoit, in the shadow of what is now Midway Airport. At that time, it was Chicago Municipal Airport, and which is an interesting place to live because the planes on the longest runway always flew right over the house.
Okay.
Um, but when I was much younger, they used to have air races out of the airport. And when I say races, I mean this was like uh, tri-wing planes, basically like you saw in World War One. And very often they would uh, have engine trouble or whatever, and they'd land in the fields behind their house. Uh, we had on Massasoit starting from 52nd going north, there were actually four houses. There were three right in a row, not on the corner, but we had this one house from the corner, then two houses right next door that I guess one builder had built and sold. And then there was one halfway down the block, which was apparently part of the farmland that was still left. And when they sold off, it still had quite a big area with some like little barns, not big barns, just little outhouses, out kind of outhouses. Not literally an outhouse, outbuildings, I guess is
Okay.
a better word, outbuildings. and that was a neighborhood. A lot of kids. It was a very mixed neighborhood. We had German, we had Polish. We were bohemian, is what they said at the time. Uh, I'm trying to think. It was a very mixed neighborhood, but everybody seemed to get along. And when I was in high school, I had a friend just prior to World War II who, I don't know how he acquired it, but he got a 1936 Ford, and we rebuilt the engine, got it running, and it ran for about 6 months, and then it just literally gave up. Everything else gave up on the car. I think we rode it too hard, but he was a little older.
So, when did you decide that you wanted to join the Navy?
Well, let's put it this way. I didn't decide. The government decided.
Got it.
um, after I had graduated from college in June of 1950, or, and I was taking a couple of, I was going to go into law school, and I was taking a couple of courses in the summer, and then the career broke. And so I was prime draft bait. Um, well, when I finished summer school, I went to Chicago because I tried to get a job, and it was impossible because nobody would want to hire you because they knew they'd say, what number do you have? I said, well, it doesn't make any difference. It's a drawing. Yeah, but you could be here 6 months. You could be here 1 week. You'd be here 1 month. We don't know. So come back with when you're through with your service. Um, well, I went back to work in the construction business. I'd been working cement summers to make money to go in college and so forth. And so I decided I was going to be a Air Force pilot, and I enlisted in the Air Force. And they got me a deferment for 4 months. I was supposed to go to Texas to get flight training. I passed the physical and everything. Um, 4 months went by. They didn't. The class hadn't started. They kept government typically delaying it. The draft board said, "We want you," and I said, "I don't want. I don't want to walk." That's what my thought was. I don't want to go in the army. So I went back to the Air Force, and I know he was a colonel. He says, I can't get you another deferment. You have to just gamble. I said, okay. I walked out of there. And in those days, this is on Rush Street in Chicago. The recruiting offices were right next to each other, Army, Navy, Air Force. That time it was the Army Air Force. It was not a separate part of the government. And I walked into the Navy and they said, oh, okay. So within about a month, I was at Great Lakes. And at Great Lakes,
Oh, wow, right there in Waukegan, huh?
at Waukegan, and a chief who had chief warrant officer who had stripes from here to here, had been in the Navy for 1,000 years. One day he said to me, "You're a college graduate, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "How would you like to How would you like to ride in a wardroom?" I said, "Chief, what's a wardroom?" He says, "Well, that's where the officers eat." He said, they're going to start an officer candidate school in Newport, Rhode Island. Would you be interested? I said, what's involved? He says, well, you have to sign on for 4 years, not just the two. I said, well, okay. So I went to Newport, Rhode Island and became a 120-day wonder. They put you through a heck of a lot of training and got married to Nancy, my wife, uh, right after I finished officer candidate school and went to Norfolk, Virginia. Was stationed on what they called an attack cargo ship. We carried fairly large landing craft and some personnel landing craft, and we primarily had big holes in the ship where we could put trucks and even the small tanks. We could load those onto our ship. And the larger boats that we had called LCMs, we could put the vehicles on them and run them right in the shore for landings. So I served 4 years out of Norfolk, Virginia. Um, it was really tough duty. I cruised the Caribbean and I cruised the Mediterranean. And because I was married, I used to stand extra duty, especially when we were in foreign ports. I'd usually go ashore. There were three guys that were married, youngest. There were some older guys that were married, but the younger ones sort of stuck together. We would go ashore for one day, then we'd stay on board, and we'd take somebody else's duty, the single guys, so they could really have a better time. And then when we, no, then we got back to Norfolk, they would stand extra duty for us so we could be with our wives, and it worked out pretty well. Um, but got out of the Navy after 4 years. Uh, Went to work for Remington Rand in their systems division. Installed the first Univac. I didn't install it. It was our division that installed it. Univac at Tallman Federal Savings and Loan Association on 63rd Street in Chicago. And it was interesting that the floor was built up because underneath it was all kinds of cable and pipe because they had to have a special air conditioning unit. This was a huge monster with all cathode ray tubes in it in those days, which heated everything up. So they had to have special air conditioning. And uh, Remington, of course, got out of that business. IBM took over and beat them in that systems. From there, I went to work with a company called Chicago Squirt Bottling Company. It was a new company. Um, at the time, I worked for them about 5 years, I guess. We were growing, got to about 25 trucks operating in Chicago. I was like a supervisor for the drivers, uh, which was a misnomer because basically all you did was fill in the blanks when somebody was sick or on vacation. You had a you had a
Not
title,
bad.
no, but and then the parent company out of California bought the Chicago operation, and for 6 months nobody was running it. And I went in one day and I said, "You need a manager here, and I've been doing the work of a manager. What do you say? You make me the manager and pay me a salary that's Oh, we're hiring people who have big experience, like for Pepsi Cola or Coca Cola. Oh, okay. So I started looking for um, another job and walked into the alcoholic beverage industry.
Do you want to explain to everybody what the UNIVAC is for people that don't know at home?
Well, Univac was a master computer, one of the first ones that was made. It was made by Remington Rand. Uh, the idea was that it was going to solve all the paper problems. There were no more paper. Nothing was going to be put on paper. Everything was going to be in the computer. And of course, that didn't happen, as you well know. But that's what a Univac was. It was a master, huge computer.
Oh wow.
I think it's pretty wild that I mean, at that time, obviously there was a lot of printing presses for newspapers and stuff like that. But now I feel like majority of Americans at least get their news just by the TV or the internet. How long do you think that the newspapers are still going to be going?
Well, surprisingly, uh, I still read a newspaper every day. Some of the newspapers will be gone. I think some local papers will survive because they carry local news, local information. national newspapers are going to be practically gone because everybody, even if you subscribe to a newspaper, the newspaper normally gives you the opportunity to go online and read online. So eventually, I think the newspapers are going to dwindle down to probably one or two, maybe covering the whole country. That's the only, that would be my guess, but or maybe covering an area, maybe certain areas of the country, but it won't be an awful lot of papers at all left.
Just getting back into it. You were telling us off camera that you wanted to stay in the Navy longer.
Well, um, I saved the captain's rear end, the new captain, when he came on board, um, because leaving Norfolk Harbor, you had to stay in the channel, and there was a fort that you had to get around, Fort Wool. Uh, and if you went on the wrong side of it, you'd wind up in mud flats. In fact, the Missouri, the battleship Missouri, had gotten stuck there like 2 months or 3 months before the incident happened. But anyway, we were leaving Port Norfolk one day, and I was in the CIC Combat Information Center. That was my position, looking at the radar, and I could see that we're going the wrong way. We're going to go into the mud flats. So I jumped out and hollered, left full rudder, all back full. And the captain, who always sat in a chair, he did not have the what was called the con running the ship. That was always a separate officer. What's going on? I said, well, we're headed toward the mud flats. He says, oh, what? And I had to explain. I said, that's Fort Wool, and we should be on the left side of it, not on the right side of it. Oh, so from then on, I was his, let's say, not his mentor, but he he'd ask me every darn question in the book, always anything about the ship. And I had gotten to be pretty good at everything on the ship because I'd been in different jobs. And he says he wanted to talk me into staying in. He says, I got some contacts. He had just come from Washington, as a matter of fact. Um, I can guarantee that you can go spend 4 years at the Naval Academy. He says, you'll be an officer assigned at the Naval Academy for training the plebes. And I thought, oh, gee, that'd be great. I talked to Nancy, my wife, and she brought out the calendar and says, "Here's how much I have seen you in the last year. Count the days. I think you need to stay home." So I got out of the Navy. Um, and I was already telling you about the Remington Rand and the soft drink
Right.
business. Well, I was unhappy at that point with the soft drink business, so uh, I started looking for ads. In those days, you went through ads in the paper, and there was an ad for a job in Chicago with National Distillers. And so I applied for it and I got it. I was assistant Metro Chicago manager for National Distillers. They make the whiskey. Uh,
Okay.
and we had 12 salesmen working in Chicago, and I was supervising them. Um, and after 5 years, I got promoted to a district manager, and I used to leave the house sometimes on Sunday, sometimes on Monday morning. Uh, I'd get back on Friday late or Friday, and sometimes I wouldn't get back to Saturday because in those days you had distributors all over. Uh, I was covering Illinois, part of Missouri, part of Indiana, which was somewhat semi-dry, and part of Wisconsin. So it was a lot of travel every week. And again, Nancy became and my wife became very unhappy and says, this is like back to the Navy. You're gone all the time, and the kids don't know you. And it was very true. So
Right.
I decided I didn't want to stay. So luckily, one of the distributors that I had been calling on had purchased the second, he had a house in Rockford, Illinois, distributing house. Um, had also purchased a house in Joliet, and he wanted to put his son in the job in Joliet. And I said, he said, do you think, he was very young, he was like 25 years old. And he said, do you think Paul can handle Joliet? I said, I'm sure he can. So his son moved down to Joliet, and he said, why don't you come to work for me in Rockford? So we moved to Rockford for 10 years. It was a great move. The kids grew up there. It was, let's say, semi-city. And Rockford at the time was booming because of their machine tool industry. It was a good place to live. And we still had all kinds of contacts in Chicago. And so we were back and forth all the time. Um, so was there for 10 years, and then one of the Chicago distributors, well, the industry was shrinking. Um, Distributors were being consolidated because suppliers were changing the way they did business. And I could see what was happening in uh, Joliet got sold or got merged with another small distributor. Uh, the owner of the distributorship was really thinking about retiring. His son came back up to Rockford, and well, there was no reason for me to stay there with the son basically running it. So I got a job with a distributor in Chicago. Uh, and stayed with them until there was another consolidation, and a corporation called McKesson, which had distributorships all over the country, had been after me for some time. I'd been offered a job in Buffalo, New York, one in Arkansas. Finally, I said, I got to move because I can see the handwriting is on the wall. We're going to be bought out or have to merge. I'm talking about the Chicago distributorship. There was one in Colorado for McKesson, so I jumped to another company and went to McKesson Corporation in Colorado, and spent 5 years there, and then that was closed because that another consolidation. I wasn't quite ready. Well, I was ready to retire. I could retire, um, but they sent me to New York for 1 year to close out some wine business that was there, and when that was over, my deal was they'd move me anywhere in the country that we wanted to go, and I wanted to go back to Colorado because I thought it was a great place to live and had learned to ski and so forth at an old age. Nancy said Chicago, and that's where we wound up, and I retired. and
Amazing.
and we had lived in Park Ridge in and out. Every time we came back to Chicago, we always wound up in Park Ridge. And we looked in Park Ridge, and I said, we had lived in a condo association in Colorado, and I'd gotten used to no grass cutting. Uh, uh, let's say very little maintenance, etc., at anything. I said, why don't we move to a condo somewhere? So we moved to Rob Roy Country Club Village, which is a condo association on the 9-hole golf course. Not that I was a good golfer. I played at it. That's all I ever did as far as golf. Um, but anyway, lived there for probably 20 plus years. And our daughter Diane said, you're getting pretty old. Why don't you come live with us? And she had married somebody from Rockford, and they still lived in Rockford and had the grandkids there. Why don't you move to Rockford? And we decided, well, that's a good idea. Then somebody to take care of us. So we moved there, and 2 years later, Tom, her husband, got transferred to Milwaukee. Well, we decided we weren't going to move again. Too many moves. So we went up to Milwaukee and looked around for places like we're living, the moorings. and couldn't find anything. Excuse me. Then we looked in this area and we looked at about six different operations. And we had friends that had lived here and that we knew. And so we wound up at the moorings, and that's the basically the end of the story. I've been here 8.5 years now, and who knows if we'll make another 8.5.
Yeah. Well, let's hope you do. Let's hope you do.
Absolutely.
Um, we have I definitely have a couple more questions for so when the alcohol companies were consolidating and they were merging, why do you think there was such a big merge during that time between all because now you I mean we can see that people are making making alcohol left and right. There's new alcohol coming up
Absolutely.
left and right, new distilleries coming up left and right. Why was that such a hard time at that point when where liquor sales were going down?
Well, no, liquor sales technically were not going down. Um, let's say it was a consolidation of distributorships, the second level. The people, distillers made it, distributors sold it. We did all the selling and delivery. At the distributor level, what was happening? This distillers at one time, when I first went into the business in Chicago, there were roughly in the state of Illinois about 15 distributorships. Now there's one that covers, well, I think there's three, but basically one big one that covers the whole state of Illinois. That's
Got it.
that's what the business had changed because the distillers just went with one operation. Uh, why that happened, I don't know, but it did. It just one of the things the industry just kept imploding, so
Shrinking.
to
Yeah.
speak.
Do you have something?
Yeah, no, I was wanted to ask. I know now radio is kind of a thing that's almost it's almost dead at this point. But I know radio was a big source of entertainment earlier on, and even earlier. I mean, even earlier in my life. So how big of like entertainment wise was radio for you when you were growing up?
Well, it was very big because on Saturday morning there were all kinds of uh, serials. You had the Lone Ranger and Tom Mix, and you had to imagine what was going on, but the descriptions were pretty good. As a matter of fact, I jokingly say to people now, I'll have the TV on and I'll be working at my desk and it's behind me. And when I hear something, I can still picture it the way I did when radio was there. Because, if it was a Lone Ranger riding, you could picture there's this guy on a horse with his mask and everything. And of course, they had the bang bang with the guns and all of that. Well, it was, and when you went to a movie, you saw, you actually saw it. So I guess that picture just sort of was in your head. And so radio was very entertaining. And of course, going to the movies was very cheap because it was 5 cents or 10 cents. And they always had a cereal on Saturday morning and I used to laugh because they'd have a scene where they're falling off the cliff, uh, two guys fighting or something, and all of a sudden, uh, if you watch the previous week, you'll see the guy falls and here's a branch sticking out up there, but he's way down here already. And the next week, when you went back to watch, the good guy grabs a hold of that branch, and the bad guy falls. I've never forgotten that scene. I don't know why I picked it up, but I thought that was hilarious. He was way down here. How did he get back up? but but that's radio was our entertainment. I mean, there were certain programs the families watched all the time, and of course, when I was very young, I remember we had one president. I didn't know that anybody else could be president except FDR. And Chicago had one mayor called Mayor Kelly. Those were two guys who were there forever as far as a kid. I thought,
Right.
when finally somebody else, well, I was much older than realized what it was. But after FDR passed and Truman got in, I said, "Oh, there is somebody else there."
Absolutely.
FDR was the first president to ever address the nation on the TV, right?
Uh, well, yeah, and but he was on the radio all the time.
Right.
He built a big following on radio. He used to have fireside chats that he called them, and he filled the public in as to what was happening. He did a good job as president and took us through World War II. Um, yeah, I didn't touch on World War II with we all had rationing and uh, um, it was, and we had scrap drives in high school. Uh, it ended, I was 17 when it ended, so one more year I probably would have been drafted into World War II.
I was going to ask, with you being present during World War II, when did the nation, like, when did America know what was going on in Germany? Because I mean, we only read about it that for a while there was so much propaganda that nobody knew what was going on in Germany, and then it started affecting um, the United States. Because I mean, you're telling me that that there was rations here and things like that, and you wouldn't think that we would be rationing here for something that happens in a different country.
Well, it was rationing here because you couldn't get some of the items. I mean, like coffee was rationed, sugar was rationed because most of that or a lot of that had to be brought in. Coffee in particular, we don't at that time. I don't think we raised any coffee. Some sugar, but not enough to supply the whole country. Gasoline, all this. Um, the word was and one thing that's you probably won't. Lucky Strike has gone to war. Lucky Strike was a brand of cigarettes, and they used to have a green package. Well, supposedly their package then changed to white because their green was used for camouflage, so they couldn't paint their or color their. So Lucky Strike has gone to war, but that was the part of the deal was it was being used to support the big military now that we were building up at the time. And yeah, and Pearl Harbor, of course, December 7th, 1941. We were headed up to Wisconsin. I had a grandmother that lived in Milwaukee, and we used to go up twice a year. We go up once in the summer and then once in right around Christmas time. So on December 7th, we were come driving back from Milwaukee, and my father had the radio on very lightly, and of course we heard about the war at that point because it was in the evening. It was dark. I don't know what time. Probably 4 or 5 o'clock our time, but uh, in Hawaii it was either it was be the next day, and they were already attacking at that time. So that changed a lot of things really, but. And big thing I think was rationing that affected everybody. You couldn't get meat, and we all managed. We didn't starve. People used to have stamps for sugar and stamps for um, gasoline and everything.
You had to get stamps for sugar and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. You had ration stamps that you could tear off and you give them to the retailer, and then that would allow you to buy a pound or whatever it was. It was probably a pound at the time. Gasoline, the same thing. You had rationing stamps for everything. The government printed them up. You got so many a month, and when they were gone, they were gone. And, and I'm sure there was an underground market for them, but I wasn't aware of it. I was, in high school at the time, and but everybody was into the war, as I, with, uh, I think we had the high school every year had a big scrap drive, and we used to get a lot of scrap. The kids would had day off, and of course the older ones drove, and some of them had family businesses with trucks. And I remember we used to get a big pile of metal scrap in the courtyard of the school for, well, their collection was probably over more than a day, but usually it was one day when it was all brought in and dumped in the schoolyard. So that's one of the things that went on in World War II. And initially they had so-called blackouts, but that sort of faded because they decided, at least Chicago had faded. I guess New York might not have. I don't know. I wasn't in New York. Uh, and some things you didn't realize, like as a kid, although I looked at the paper, I probably didn't read it. Um, I didn't realize that there were so many ships being sunk off the East Coast, as an example, with the submarines, that it was such a big problem that because it wasn't really published that well for maybe older people do it, but I didn't as a kid. I was surprised when I did find out later.
What's one of the things that was probably the hardest to come by when you were in this kind of rationing period as being a kid? Was there like one thing that stood out to you the most that was like just, or was it, because I'm trying to put myself in the situation, is was there one thing that it just, after the month was gone and there was no more rations for that was just the hardest to get through?
Uh, no, probably I think meat was one of the toughest things. It was, normally you didn't have enough meat to last the whole month. That's what I recall, that you'd wind up eating a lot of vegetables and a lot of grain stuff. Pasta you could always get, so that's what you ate pretty much toward the end of the month. Uh, and but I don't remember any, real bad. We didn't starve, let's put it that way, and there wasn't any really bad hardship that you went hungry. Uh, you just had to tighten your belt a little bit, be careful as to how long you could spread your rationing stamps.
Okay. There's another thing I wanted to ask about as well. Obviously, a lot of people don't know what a party line is, and with the home phones, and a lot of people don't even have home phones in their houses anymore. Everything's gone to now cell phones. Could you talk about a little bit about the party lines?
um, I'm trying to think, where did I run in? Uh, we never had a party line.
Okay.
Well, maybe we did. But if we did, I don't know how many people were on it, because we never really had a problem uh, getting on the phone. Maybe people were more courteous. I know that there were other people on the line, but if you picked it up and you had to make a phone call, uh, everybody knew who was on with you. And you just say, "Oh, well, I'll finish my conversation. Give me X minutes." And most people were very courteous. We never had any problem with the party line. But uh, as a kid, I wasn't making many phone calls at that time. So it's not like now you guys are on the phones all the time. It was a lot different. We didn't. We Well, one thing, we could go out any time of the day. I won't say at night, but normally, even as when I was very young, we used to play on the street corner under a street lamp, which was a gas street lamp, by the way, um, up until 10, maybe 10 o'clock at night was sort of our deadline. And I mean, I think I was probably still in elementary school, maybe in my eighth grade or so. But it was always a gang of kids, males and females, and we used to play uh, hide and seek from there. What was another one? What was this? You got to be the horse, and people would jump on your back up. You had to put your shoulder up against the pole. I'm trying to remember, what was that? hump, jump, jump, something. I don't remember how it went, but that was one of the games. But hide and seek was one. Kick the can, that was a big one. And we were out till usually 10:30 at night. Uh, it, it was a very safe from that safe era for the kids from that standpoint. The night, I guess, if you're eighth grade, what are you, 13, 14?
Yeah,
Yeah, your parents are afraid to let you out at that hour. I mean, what's going on
absolutely.
all over Chicago.
Well, to play devil's advocate, with the cell phones and the internet, now you can see everything on TV. So of course, people are going to be scared just because of the crimes that they see on TV. And
Absolutely.
unfortunately, now everything has to be done from your cell phone or the computer. There's no job applications that you can go in and fill out. There's nothing. Nothing is on paper anymore.
It's
Everything's
like
so
even if you go into there, they'll say, "So we're gonna set you up at this computer and
right.
just fill out the application here." You're like,
Or
"Oh
can't you
wow."
just go on your phone and go on this website and fill this out? And so it's now we're being forced to always use technology. So that's kind of the downfall of society there.
You don't know how frustrating it is to be old and remember how you called a company, a live person answered and said, "How can I help?" Now you get a computer that answers that's smarter than I am. And I hate talking to computers. Had an experience last summer. I stopped driving in August, but last May I blew a tire at a pothole, and I hadn't used my well, yeah, no, well, it was through ARP, I guess. No, it was ARP through ARP. It comes through Allstate. And I hadn't used it in about 5 years or more. So I pick up and I have a cell phone, which I it's my cell phone. I use it only when I want to use it. Okay, I don't want other people using it. So I call and I get a response that I think is a live person. You'll have help in 10 minutes. So where are you located and so forth. And I said, well, here's where I'm located. I was in a park right on Euclid Avenue, not far from here. And I said, I pulled off into the parking lot of the park and named the park and so forth. Well, what's the address? I said, I don't know what the address is. I said, this is a park. Well, then I realized I'm talking to a computer. Okay. So I said, well, it's such and such a park, whatever. And all right, we'll find you or something like that. I said, can't you ping my phone and find out, well, whatever, maybe a live person came on. 10 minutes. So I wait about 20, 25 minutes. I call again. Now I know I'm now getting text messages back from a computer, and I have to text back. I can't speak. I can speak, but it's a text message going back.
Right.
Oh, I was so frustrated. Finally, about an hour and 20 minutes later, I, every time I would call, they'll be there in 10 minutes. It was a road answer that you get constantly, and very frustrating. And that, as an older person with minimal tech knowledge, it drives me crazy. And some
Understood.
of the people here have none. I don't know how they get by. And you get put on hold, and hold for up to 5 minutes. I think is okay, but then it gets to be 15 and 20
Yeah, an hour.
and 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 I appreciate companies that say we'll call you back because that's what I do automatically. And then when they call back, um, but still, most of the time you're dealing with a computer, and I guess it's going to get worse now with AI is going to be really something. But I don't know. It's tough for old people. Let's put it that way.
It's not easy for younger people either, because with those
No.
automated lines, I had a similar experience with Xfinity, and let's just say I probably don't ever want to hear the recorded line of the
Oh
things that
my
I was saying
goodness.
to this automated person because they would not be good for anybody to hear that stuff. But
Absolutely.
with the AI, that I'm glad you brought that up. What do you think about this artificial intelligence? Obviously, we've had RoboCop, we've had iRobot, we've had all these movies that have come out that this AI, this artificial intelligence, has now been mass produced, and we have. I mean, we do have robots now. They're just not being used for what we see in the movies, but I mean, they have AI robots that are self checking for items that are on shelves and restocking items that are on shelves that bring you your food. There's, robot waiters and waitresses. So, what do you think about all the artificial intelligence going on?
Well, I'm afraid for the people that are going to be losing their jobs because I don't know uh, how they're going to be able to make a living. I think AI is going to put so many people out of work. I don't know if the AI industry can accommodate or pick up some of them, but that's what scares me the most. I don't think AI is going to take over the world, but I do think it's going to affect a lot of people who will become unemployed. And I don't know how you can avoid becoming unemployed because it's going to affect white collar, it's going to affect uh, people stocking shelves, as was mentioned. Um, Almost any type of physical labor that can be done by a robot will probably be done quicker, faster, and with more efficiency than a lot of humans can do it. Eventually, I think that's what's going to happen. Um, how the society will survive with no work, that's what scares me, but I won't be around to worry about it.
Yeah, Jeff Bezos has now made a new Amazon truck that's able to drive itself, the electric ones. So now you just
Crazy.
have a driver in there that drops off the packages. Nobody's driving the car, or the new electric cars they have now, the Rivian. I don't know if you've heard of that company, Rivian. I think believe it is Rivian, but yeah, it's
They had a plant right here in Illinois.
Rivian did.
Yeah.
It's just it's nuts to see everything kind of transpire. At this point, I feel like the only way that people are going to survive in the workforce is entertainment or technology itself. If you're working in cybersecurity, if you're working anything that has to do with computers, because they're still going to need someone to back check that. You know what I mean? Just because the AI does it itself, there's still going to have to be a bunch of clearances behind that, I believe. But yeah, did you have anything else?
I think that was it for me,
That
buddy.
was it.
Yeah.
Grandpa, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so
Thank you
much.
for having us here.
You're welcome. I hope you can make sense out of what I've said, but
Oh, it was
Honestly, this
great.
was no, this was an amazing experience, and we really appreciate you
Really
taking the time to
appreciate
do
it.
this.
when you leave me a link and anything I can think of, I'll add to it.
Awesome.
Absolutely, absolutely, no problem. Everybody, thank
I'm kidding, guys.
thank you for liking, subscribing, commenting, and joining us.
Yes,
Thank you for
yes.
commenting, guys, and thank you for coming in for your daily dose.